I was reading this morning out of Deuteronomy, and I thought about the music part of worship. You know, when we have a worship service in our churches, everything we do in that service is worship, not just the singing. We worship the Lord in song. We worship the Lord in supplication. That's prayer. We worship the Lord with sacrament. We worship the Lord in the preaching of the sermon, how we preach and how we receive the sermon. We worship the Lord through fellowship and through generosity, and so many ways we worship the Lord. But today we want to talk about the music part of worship. And I was reminded of the Song of Moses. At the end of Deuteronomy, it's recorded in chapter 32. But what led up to that, in verse 14 of chapter 31, the Lord spoke to Moses, and he basically tells him, you're about to die. You're at the end of your life. You're at the end of your ministry. You're at the end of your leadership. And he says, now I want you to call Joshua, and I want you guys to meet here together. And then when Joshua shows up, the cloud of God falls, the presence of God falls. And the Lord speaks to Moses and says, here's what is going to happen once you're no longer leading. He says, the people will rise and whore after foreign gods. That's a bad thing. He says, they'll forsake me. They'll forsake my covenant. Then he says, my anger will burn. And he says, I will hide my face from your people, from these people. And this is really a bad situation. This is bleak. And so you think about all of Moses' leadership. He's provided spiritual leadership. He's provided intellectual leadership. He's provided political leadership, military leadership, every kind of leadership you can imagine. This guy is the GOAT of Old Testament leadership, the greatest of all time, and the undisputed great leader. And all that he's led, miracles and supernatural manifestations of God's power, all types of things. And look at the last thing God tells him. He says, here's what's about to happen, and I want you to warn the people. And really, he's giving Moses instructions so that these things don't happen, the falling away, the breaking of the covenant, and all of this stuff. And here's what he says. He explains all of this in verse 19. He says to Moses, now, therefore, write this song. Think about this great leader, of all the things that he could have done and all of the things that he has done as a leader. And when this final terrible situation's about to happen, God's solution is for Moses to write a song. And then he goes down and he says that this song in verse 21, a song that will confront them. And it says in the end of that, in leading into verse 22, it's a song that will be unforgettable. It'll be unforgotten song. And it says, so Moses wrote the song that same day. And then you see in chapter 32, that song. And I pray that our songwriters will write songs that are not just encouraging, but also confrontational, that'll keep us from giving into the worst part of what humanity is, that will remind us of what God did, that will be unforgettable. And you know, there are a lot of forgettable songs out there, but this was an unforgettable one, and it had the impact, and it was God's way of helping Moses lead and Joshua lead in a way that would avoid all of these disastrous things that were the possibilities that could happen. And it was a song. And so today we're talking about the music part of worship. We'll touch on worship in general overall, but the music part. There's so many aspects to worship, but the power of songs. And it's a privilege to have my friend, my colleague, my longtime ministry partner here, ministry colleague in the Every Nation Global office, Pastor Justin Gray. And so Justin, with that long introduction, Todd, give me your thoughts, because you're a songwriter, you're a producer, but you also lead other aspects of worship. Mm-hmm. You lead the preaching part of worship. You preach regularly. You lead the communion, the sacrament part of worship. But let's talk about the songs. Yeah. And maybe even right from the start, the power of a song. Yeah. Why was a song the solution to the potential backsliding that the people could possibly happen after Moses was no longer there? What is the power of a song, and how does that inform how we should pick songs in a worship context?
Great question. So I actually noticed two things when I was doing some study on songwriting. One, and many people don't know this, is that the average person listens to about 32 hours of music per week.
Wow.
Now, Pew Research Center did another survey where they found that people listen to teaching on the Bible roughly 2 to 3 hours per week. So I'm sorry to all my pastors out there, but music is dwarfing the amount of time that people are being exposed to
Is that
preaching.
listening to 32 hours of Christian music or music in general?
Music in general, but hopefully some Christian music. And so the question is, what is that formationally doing in people's lives as they listen to that music, as they reflect upon who they are and who God is and where they find their place in the world? Music has an incredible impact and influence on people's lives. And so even more so when we come into a worship context, we have an opportunity as leaders to really work toward the formation of God's people through the singing portion of worship. So whenever I get a chance to address worship leaders, I'm always helping them to upgrade their view of the responsibility that they have in a worship context for selecting those songs that really help to form people in their discipleship.
And when we talk about forming, all right, so we're looking at in Deuteronomy something. The hope was something would be formed in these people where they remembered what God did. Absolutely. They remembered the covenant rather than breaking the covenant. They remembered who they are in comparison to God and all of that. Yeah. And this is a long song. This goes from 32 verse 1 to verse 44. Not suggesting we do those every week.
44 verse song.
Yeah, 44 verse song. But talk about formation.
Yeah.
Why does a song form, and what are the good things formed in us, and what are maybe the not so good things formed in us?
Yeah, so there's many ways that songs shape us. There's lots of sociological studies and all these really smart people who deal with the brain and how we receive information and how we remember things. But I think ultimately what it boils down to is that songs kind of have three categories that they work in. One, song shapes and helps us identify who we are. It's something about our culture, our personhood, how we interact with the world. Songs speak to that. they help to codify that or work in our lives. They give us words to express what that means, what that is. It also does the same thing to form a collective group, a corporate group. So songs form a me, songs form a we, and songs form us spiritually.
Okay, now you talk about songs forming me. I think I understand that as a teacher and as a preacher. Talk about how songs form we. What do you mean when you say that song? Because that's an important thing, that there's a community being formed. And that was certainly in Deuteronomy.
Absolutely.
Moses was not only preaching and leading and all this, but he was building a family, a community. Sure. He was building an identity. So talk about that. How do songs do that versus pulling us apart?
So the interesting thing from Scripture is that both in Paul's writing in Colossians 3 and also in Ephesians 5, he's writing to these churches and he's actually commending singing songs to one another. So he's saying, and I think in the Colossians verse, he says, teaching one another songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. I think in the Ephesians passage, he might use the word admonishing, if I'm not mistaken. But the whole point is the songs were meant to be formative and to shape and reinforce the belief about God and the unity among one another and what was happening in the mission of God in that local church. And so from Scripture, we can see that really clearly. And then let's take something really simple. I often laugh because a rock concert is one of the few places that you can go where the people who attend become a choir.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, I don't know anybody here, but we're side by side and our focus is on the music from this artist. And then at some point we start to sing. We sing, and then we're recounting our passion for the artist's work or our passion as fans of this particular artist. Well, if we were to take that same concept over into the church world, we're here to make Jesus famous. We're here to focus on his goodness, his glory. We together are recounting what he's done in the world.
Yeah. Okay, now when you talk about at a concert, my mind goes back to my early teen days, and I won't mention which concerts I went to, tagging along with my older brother and his friends. But you're right. There's a collective singing, and the obvious reason is that these people have listened to so much of that artist, and they have listened to that song. There wasn't a keynote presentation at the ZZ Top's concert I went to in New Orleans when I was 14, tagging along with my brother and his friends. There was but every song. So we can't do that in church. It should be forming a we, but if we have a brownout, or we can't sing the songs because there are so many songs and some of them are so wordy. So how do we solve that? And is that something to be solved, or is that just the world today versus the world then? And I think also not just a rock concert, but I think about my early days as a believer, as a high school kid. Our youth group in the Presbyterian church where I got saved, 150 people there, and there's a guy on a guitar, the youth pastor. There are no lyrics on the wall. There's no overhead projector. There's no, they were scripture songs. And there was a very short song list because we knew all the songs. I don't know how we knew them, but we knew them. He would just sing and we would sing along, and it was real simple.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we've definitely come a long way in terms of the technology of events and all those kind of things. So to your point, if there is a brownout, we might be in trouble in some of our contexts with our songs. I typically like to encourage people to go simple and to go fewer songs is better. And for some really obvious reasons. One is the repeatability of a song helps to reinforce the repetition. So I'm singing something over and over again, and I'm being formed, we're being formed, and there's something in our collective consciousness about God and who he is that we can continue to go back to. The more you stretch out that song pool, the more difficult that becomes, and then actually the more technology you need to support it. Because if we don't have the technology to support it, then it's almost going to be an impossible task for us to come together and worship in song. So I
remember, and I'm sure you were there at some of these, I can't remember if we were wearing masks or not, but there were the prayer marches here in Nashville when several hundred of us would march from, where was it, that park at the end of, down by the river, and march up, and hundreds of people singing with no instrument, no real song leader, but singing songs and then stopping and praying. It prayed at the Capitol and prayed at the court building and the police station and various praying for our city. And that was pretty powerful. And yet we so often don't do those songs that are, some of those were simple, some weren't simple, but they were so common that
and
this
singable.
Group of people, common and singable, and they were old. I mean, for now they were old. They were probably from the, I don't know, 70s, 60s, I'm not sure. But why do we not do that anymore? It seems like when we get in a church worship service, we don't have those, we don't do those kind of songs. We seem to leave those out. And you remember those moments out there in the, out there just in the streets. Not low tech. Absolutely no tech.
Good question. I mean, I think that some of it has to do with the worship music industry and the songs that are out there and available to us. I think a lot of it has to do with how technology is leveraged in a lot of our churches now. So we have been kind of culturally conditioned to lean into more wordy songs, songs that have certain dynamics that otherwise we wouldn't have had at a different period. The thing that helps kind of reorient me, kind of putting the salt shaker back in the middle of the table, to use one of your analogies, is I often reflect back on the Acts narrative where Paul and Silas are in prison.
So you don't think they had a keynote there?
You know what? There's no keynote. There's no lyrics projected on the dungeon wall, because they're in a dungeon and in shackles. And I have some serious questions about Paul's musical prowess. I don't know if he was, I don't know if he was some kind of spectacular vocalist, nor do I think Silas was. And they had just been badly beaten. I mean, within an inch of their lives. But it says that as they prayed and they sang these songs to God, which I have to imagine had to be simple, probably the Psalms. And it filled that place and turned a dungeon into a sanctuary. And you have all these people who are listening, because that's what this text tells us, they were listening. Then this miraculous, event where God shatters the prison doors and, all this stuff happens. And, there's lots we could do to spiritualize that and bring it into kind of the breakthrough worship and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it was the simplicity of that moment where they, even in bonds in a dungeon, they were able to recount who God was and to sing that and to pray out.
And it's interesting that they sang. We're talking about songs being formative, and they certainly are. And I would guess whatever they sang had a formative work on their lives, but songs also bring hope, and they also express pain, and they certainly if they were singing the Psalms, which is Jewish people and now Jewish believers, that would have been their CCLI list. Would have been the Psalms of David and the Psalms of Moses and the Old Testament songs. And when I think about that, and you're talking about that moment there in prison, it reminds me of my first few trips to China, close to 40 years ago.
Wow.
And being in small, isolated, underground moments, not literally underground, but hidden. China's kind of gone through waves of very serious oppression and repression, and then kind of they open up and they tolerate Christians, and then it closes. And I think about the times when it was closed and we were whispering songs. So we would be in a room packed in, and then the leader would say, okay, let's sing. And it's everybody's whispering and you can barely hear it. And even when it gets to the big parts of these songs, it was all in Chinese, and there were songs they had written, the Chinese church. But I remember experiencing that. It's not a prison like Paul and Silas, but it was a different situation where obviously there was no tech because they couldn't have it loud, but yet it was singing in their hearts and in their minds, but it was barely coming out of their mouth. And yet, wow, what a moment. Those were formative moments for me, even though I didn't have a clue what we were actually saying. But it is the power of song.
Absolutely.
So let's shift a little bit. Okay, we have song leaders. Some people call them worship leaders, some call them song leaders, some call them music directors, various names around the world and what they're used. But we know what we're talking about. What would you say to people in that position? They're a worship leader, song leader, music director, that type of thing. And I think pastors that are the lead pastor or the senior pastor have sort of two extremes. Most are probably in the middle. But on one extreme, you have a pastor who has so delegated and so empowered, they're completely disconnected. They're hearing from God, showing up, preaching, and have given this over. And yet you as the song leader, music director, worship leader, really want input and want to make sure you're connecting with the sermon, so you're not having two contradictory, not only contradictory theology, but contradictory directions, but you can't track down your pastor to get that input. And then on the other hand, you have pastors who are dictating every single thing, and every time you have an idea, maybe it gets swatted down. No, I want this. How do you navigate those two? Those are two completely different. And again, most are somewhere in the middle, but speak to that.
So on either extreme, I think it ultimately comes down to contending for unity and just making an appeal. I mean, I have had worship leaders or music directors come to me and say, hey, I want to collaborate more with my senior pastor, but he's really busy, or some other things are going on where I'm unable to. And
just in honesty, sometimes non-musical pastors like me, in the early days, because I was so challenged musically, I felt I didn't even have an opinion.
Well, actually, that's why
I should have, but I didn't.
For sure. And so that's where I think making the appeal is important, because I think as much as the music director needs to make that appeal to the leader, also the leader needs to hear that their input is actually vital in how to build the discipleship and worship culture of the local church. Because at the end of the day, I mean, one of the core responsibilities for us pastorally is to help set that context for the theology of worship in the local church, right? So, and that's part of the stewardship that we have. And so I think sometimes just being reminded of that, or having someone appeal to you and say, hey, I'm working on these song sets, or I know we have this special event coming up. It would be great if you could just give me one of your core objectives. So again, you have a pastor who maybe hasn't landed on that sermon yet, but they at least might have something philosophically, something strategic, a core objective that they're trying to accomplish in the congregation. Well, we can draw from that. Or maybe there's a biblical text that you're starting to work from that's a theme for the year or something like that. Hey, what is that? And then we can start to work collaboratively from there. So I think that that's kind of the starting point. Again, now on the other side of things, where you have maybe a leader that's a bit more particular, where they want to dictate and be, the other point, if I could make an appeal to a pastor who's listening, is that really you have an opportunity to make some leadership upgrades and some growth opportunities for that song leader or that music director by giving them a little more context, a little more insight, and maybe even empowering them a bit more in that process. Because eventually what's going to happen is they're going to grow and become a better partner with you in ministry if you allow them that space to continue to grow in those other ways. So those are some of the ways I would.
That's helpful. Justin, a couple of weeks ago, you and I were both at the North America Build Conference. And I was a part of a Q&A panel after a sermon. And one of the questions, I was given a list of questions I would be asked by the moderator, our friend Adrian. And he didn't ask one single question on there, but he was flowing with where the conversation, which he's great at what he does. But one of the questions, I wish I could go back and re-answer it in light of this, in light of worship leaders and music directors in a spotlight on a stage. And you might remember he asked, what's the biggest concern you have
I remember that.
in the body of Christ right now, but particularly every nation churches around the world? And I said, my biggest concern is celebrity culture. I wish I could refine that. I wish I had said the influence of celebrity culture. Because I think most of our people aren't interested in being celebrities. Some of them are forced to, there are probably some listening to this who are. They look at every single like or smiley face or whatever the thing is that gives them the dopamine infusion in the moment. Most aren't. Most of the people we work with really aren't. They're really humble, very godly, humble people but I think it's the influence of celebrity worship leaders, the influence of celebrity preachers, the influence of celebrity culture in general on our people that is a real point of concern for me versus the influence of their own church community and the influence of like our community of songwriters. And so all that I'm going to ask you something about this, because you and I both have been in situations where we go to a church and they've written amazing songs and they don't do their own songs. Okay? And I looked at one leader, you know what I'm talking about, and I said, you guys write some of the greatest. I said, I have been in South Africa, they do your songs. I've been in Malaysia, they do your songs. I've been in Australia, they do your songs. The Philippines, they do your songs. You don't do your own songs. They're that humble. And I think there's a good side of that where we're not self-promoting and we're not, but yet I looked at the pastor, I looked at the songwriter and the worship leader. I said, I don't understand why you don't do your own songs. I think he was overly humble. But then I talked to his pastor. I said, why don't you do your own songs? So I know you've had the same experiences. I believe in our people. I believe in our writers and in all that. So what would you say to people that are either a pastor, a senior pastor, lead pastor, who has the ultimate authority to decide what's sung, and the music directors and the worship leaders about their own music, and the broader Every Nation family about our songs? What's the conversation you have? Because you're in this conversation all the time.
So usually in that case, there's a couple things that work there. One, I actually believe, and I've had some conversations with people to confirm this, but it's anecdotal. There is a bit of an inferiority complex. And this goes back to your point.
I haven't heard that.
Here's the thing. So when you're saturated with the influence of celebrity culture, it is diminishing of your contribution. It just is, because I'm not as good as they are. So we do the comparison game. Oh man, their production is on this level and their vocals are on this level. And then they have the marketing campaigns all over and everybody's talking about their music and it's on the CCLI top, whatever. So I guess I'll just defer to them and do whatever everybody else is doing. Well, that actually has a negative effect. Not only on how you view the contribution that God has called you to make, but it also diminishes the local church's voice as it relates to worship, because there's something that God is doing in your local context that you should be able to articulate. And when you do that well, it actually reinforces the community, because we talked about it earlier. It shapes a me, shapes a we, and it's spiritually formative. So when we take our vocabulary of worship, if we were to use that term, in our local context, and we double down on that, and we say, you know what, not to the exclusion of what the body of Christ is doing. It's not a bad thing. And there's great songs out there. And we're not saying don't sing anybody else's songs. But when we do have a ministry where we're writing songs and we're making this investment, how much more will it resonate when we lean into what we're doing? And the reality is, and this is why I try to push our songwriters on, is that's how they did it. We forget that part. They started somewhere and they doubled down on what was important to them, which is why they are where they are in many cases. And some of it has to do with marketing and publicists and a lot of money and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, a lot of these ministries, looking all back throughout church history, they had a theology of worship that they supported with their music. That happened in the Reformation. That happened in the Vineyard movement.
You talk about the Reformation because Martin Luther's message spread as much, maybe more, through his songs than his writing, because not everybody could read, but everybody could listen to a song and everybody could sing. And his theology, Reformation theology, spread far and wide.
Yeah, same thing with the Wesleys. Wesleys as well.
Absolutely.
So you could just look out throughout all church history and just see like when there was a value system, a theological structure, a certain kind of mission and message, capturing that in music and having that 1-2 punch of the word sung and the word preached, it just maximized impact. And so again, I think a local church would do well to lean into that and not diminish that impact that they can have on their local context and beyond.
And Justin, that's great. And I really appreciate you not only writing great songs, but mentoring writers. And I'm watching the quality, the depth, I think the theological depth, the clarity of mission and vision, and the clarity of focus on Jesus, as well as the musicality of the whole thing. I'm watching it year by year get better and better and better. And I certainly don't look at our what do I call it? Our
community, our music community,
our hymn book, whatever we are. I don't look at it inferior at all because honestly, I don't listen to anything else. So I don't know what's out there. I really don't. If you look at my Spotify playlist, it's instrumental, it's old jazz, old school jazz. And it's Every Nation music, and it's a little bit of 70s rock and roll. And they're depending on if I'm in a hurry going somewhere. So then there'll be a little bit of that. But because I'm honestly not aware of what's out there other than old hymns. But what would you say? How do you try to make the case for a pastor of why, if our music directors are too humble to push their own stuff, most of them are, maybe I'm interpreting it as humility, you're saying maybe it's inferiority complex, maybe it's both.
A little bit of both.
But what would you say to the pastors who can trump what they're doing and say, no, you're doing this song anyway? What would you say to them?
I mean, I would strongly appeal to them that there's a few things that their leadership can impact. One is, so there's a worship leadership research firm that identified 3 core ways that music travels or songs gain notoriety in churches. Of the top 3, the first being conferences and events, the second being the leadership of a senior pastor. So what happens is that the way songs kind of build and get ingested into the life of a church and really spread beyond is the influence of leaders creating buy-in around those songs and really championing them in the local church context. So I think that that's a huge win. I think that that doubles down on your discipleship and on your mission objectives as a local church. I think the other thing to remember is that by doubling down on that, you're actually affirming the people who are working with you and who are giving that time creatively to create those songs. Sometimes they just need a cheerleader to say, you know what, I'm in your corner. We're on the same team, we're on mission together, we're building this thing. And so I want to support you. So those would really be the 2 key ways I think I would have pastors thinking about how they can maximize impact as it relates to song selection in the local church.
And it has to be very uplifting when the senior pastor says, I want you to do your song. I want that song you wrote that we sang a few, let's get that. And it must be deeply discouraging when your own spiritual leader doesn't value what you're doing. And I would think the more we value and platform, the more is cranked out and the better it gets. But when there's a discouragement and my own family doesn't even value what I'm doing, maybe I'm not supposed to do this. So I think it can have an exponential result one way or the other, either negatively or positively as we get where we're trying to go. And again, I do think you've done a great job in encouraging and mentoring and really pouring gasoline on the fires where we have them in a positive way. And I think we're the message that's coming out of our churches all over the world, from Asia, Africa, Middle East, South Pacific, and really all over the place.
Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, there you go. And here in North America, I mean, really, it's hard to keep up with what's happening. Give me a final thought you would have for our people that are watching this, that are on either side of this. They're either the lead pastor. What would you say about the importance of this whole music side of worship? And what's a final word you would say to the people that are the song leaders, the song directors, music directors, worship leaders?
Yeah, I would just say to our senior pastors that you have a significant impact to make. I would say that the influence that you have on the people that you serve, particularly as it relates to the mission and the theology of worship in your local church context, whether you think you're musical or not, it doesn't matter. God has graced you and given you the stewardship and the responsibility to oversee those things in the local church, and lean in and maybe set the table for that collaboration with that music leader. And then again, to the music director or worship leader, lean in with your senior pastor. And one other thing I would mention too is that you want to continue to develop skills, not just in music, but in your devotional life and how you lead from the platform in other areas, like in exhortation, in prayer, in scripture reading, because there's so many opportunities on the platform besides singing to really call people to engage Jesus, to love God, to draw near to him. And there's more tools at your disposal than just a song. So continue to grow in your leadership and seek out those growth opportunities. But those would really be the two things that I would say to those leaders.
That's great, Justin. Thank you. And listen, everybody who's involved in music, singers, musicians, writers, whatever aspect of the music part of worship you're involved in, my word of encouragement to you is run from fame. Reject celebrity. Do not be influenced by celebrity. Be influenced by your spiritual community. Be more influenced by your pastor, your small group leader, the elders of your church. Let that be the primary influence on the direction you're going musically, not a random celebrity that you don't know. Some of those are wonderful people, but God's put people in our lives to help shape us and direct us. And do not get sucked into celebrity. Run from fame and keep writing great songs. So the pastors, keep preaching the word. Go deeper and deeper. Stand up every week as a part of worship. Your worship to God is preaching. He's your audience. You're preaching to please Him, whether it pleases the people or not. You're preaching to shape that congregation that God has called you to shepherd, not the people who might tune in online somewhere from somewhere else. If it helps them, fine. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter. You're going to give an account to God for that flock right in front of your face, the people who are right there present. So hear from God, step into that pulpit with your eyes on the Lord and deliver the word from God. And also pastor and shape all of these music people. They're looking to you for direction. I'm not trying to make you a songwriter. Some of you are, most of you are not. But give them direction. Here's the direction the church is going. It would be great to have some songs that focus on whether they write them or find those songs. Let them know the spiritual direction and the word of the Lord for where our congregation, our church is going. And so listen, you're all doing a great job. It's an honor to be a part of what you're doing. Yes. And I pray that God would take us, the musical part of worship, the sermon part of worship, and every aspect of our worship community. I pray God would take us from glory to glory to glory.